cost of living. Lwaxana shows up to show Alexander the joys of life, while nobody pays attention to the ship about to explode the entire time.
The Enterprise is torpedoing an asteroid that is about to hit an inhabited planet, and despite their efforts, a remaining part will still cause large-scale destruction.
And of course, they only have 30 seconds.
Data says more torpedoes will have no effect due to the asteroid's composition, which seemed unlikely from how big that explosion was, and it's a freaking, starship. They can blow up planets with this stuff. And they end up using the deflector dish to shoot a particle beam. They don't say of what, and they say it causes a, quote, nuclear effect in the asteroid. It makes it explode.
But as they fly away, sparkles drift towards and settle on the ship.
At a session with Troy, Worf and Alexander are having an argument about whether Alexander was doing his chores as told.
And it's getting pretty heated, and Troy ends up suggesting a contract.
With the rules clearly spelled out. For the child and the parent.
They reluctantly agree, and as soon as they leave, Troy gets word that her mother is coming aboard.
And she announces that she's getting married, and the ceremony will happen on the ship.
In 10 Forward, Troy asks who this guy is that she's marrying and when and where she met him.
But Lwaxana is being purposely vague, and it turns out they haven't actually met yet.
She found him on spacematch.com. And she finally says that he is...
Compio, third minister to the Conference of Judges from the planet Costolane. Royalty, my little one, naturally.
And during this conversation, Worf and Alexander enter, discussing the contract, which Lwaxana is against.
She takes Alexander's side, saying that he'll learn responsibility on his own, and Troy and Worf make the kind of faces that I make while I'm watching a Buffy episode. Riker reveals to Picard that Lwaxana wants him to be the one to give the bride away, and as they walk off, we see the sparkles sparkling their way along the ceiling.
Alexander's waiting for Troy when Lwaxana comes in, and he ends up opening up to her.
Alexander complains that Worf only cares about following the rules.
So she takes him to a colony of free spirits on the holodeck, and that's when I knew this episode was going to be great.
It turns out to be this weird-ass Alice in Wonderland Dr. Seuss nightmare world filled with characters that are presented as if they are whimsical and playful, when they just come off as creepy and weird.
And I don't know if it's in Majel Barrett's contract, but a weird face thing has to show up every time she shows up on the show.
Yeah, I refer to it in my notes as a terrifying demon trapped in a floating bubble.
Something out of Doom. Everything they ran into was so annoying, and it felt like lame, low-budget original series stuff.
I agree. She says they're going for a mud bath, and when they finally get there, she talks about how everyone should just do whatever they want in the moment while they eat styrofoam cups.
If this was the first episode of the show that somebody watched, I would not blame them for thinking this was a dumb show and not continuing.
Or just being too scared to keep watching.
Meanwhile, Worf is grumbling about Alexander not doing his chores when Troy comes in and discovers he's on the holodeck with Lwaxana.
When they get there, they're challenged by the bubble demon, but Worf manages to defeat it. They find Lwaxana and Alexander and discuss Lwaxana's parenting techniques, before eventually shifting to the marriage, and Troy is surprised that Lwaxana is going to wear a dress instead of being naked like in a traditional Beta Z ceremony.
And while they're arguing, Lwaxana orders tea, but she ends up with something else.
I thought it was just her not knowing how to use the replicator, but Geordi and Data are investigating why the replicators are not working properly.
They go to check out a fluctuation and end up finding some orange goo.
Lwaxana tries on the wedding dress sent by Campio and is upset at how little skin it shows when Alexander walks in.
He meets Mr. Hom, who's doing his best lurch face. And Lwaxana starts to reveal her own insecurities to Alexander.
They exploit the recent death of Gene Roddenberry by putting the camera right in Majel Barrett's face while she talks about being old and alone.
I'm alone, Alex. And when you do get older, then you do what we call compromise. Keeps you from being afraid.
Data and Geordi are telling Picard about the orange goo when the ship starts rocking all over the place, but impressively, no one falls over or even stumbles.
And they start losing control of various ship systems.
They find more of the Ghostbusters 2 slime, but they still can't tell what caused it, even though Worf is always upset and his negative emotions would be causing that.
Campio beams aboard and turns out to be very formal and talks about not wanting to rush things with Lwaxana.
He's also played by the awesome Tony J, who is of course accompanied by his kick-ass voice.
Indeed, Mrs. Troy. You are even lovelier in person.
Oh, no.
Do we want to say anything about who he played in other things?
He's Megabyte. That's all you gotta know.
He was Baron Mordo in Spider-Man.
He was in the Hunchback of Notre Dame, Frodo, or Frollo, I can't remember his name. And when Lwaxana goes to make a move, she is blocked by his protocol master.
After all, it would be unpardonable simply to abandon ourselves to the moment, would it not?
Oh, unpardonable.
Geordi finds that the only element in common between the areas being affected is nitrium, which is not a real thing, but there is no nitrium in those areas anymore.
So they hypothesize that something is eating the nitrium in the ship, and the Ghostbuster slime is the waste product.
Worf tries to get Alexander to eat,
But he's too busy reenacting Final Fantasy X cutscenes.
Eat, son.
And he ends up leaving to meet Lwaxana.
Lwaxana is having trouble coping with Campio's Federation-level lack of understanding of cultural differences.
She's being boxed in by all of her commitments catching up to her, and for as many people as were present in this scene, I thought it was a very well-executed conversation between all of them.
I agree, it definitely stood out from the rest of the episode. And while everyone is arguing with each other, Lwaxana leaves with Alexander.
They escape to the holodeck, where they continue to bond over their misery.
And suddenly the holodeck starts dissolving. Geordi and Data tell Picard about the organism and how the ship's technology is filled with nitrium.
They suspect it came from the asteroid, and want to take it back to the asteroids.
Because they contain large amounts of nitrium.
Data says they can shoot a nitrium beam and have the sparkles follow it.
So why do they need to go back to the asteroids? Why can't they just do that and fly away?
Yes, that's exactly what my question was.
In the meantime, Data suggests using cold gas to slow the organisms down.
The ship is collapsing around them, and Picard tells Data that he might be the only one conscious by the time they reach the asteroids, which of course turns out to be the case.
Data shoots the particle beam, and the sparkles follow the beam to the asteroids. And then life support is suddenly just okay, even though the damage caused by the organisms would still be there.
Yeah, all those parts of the ship are melted away. I want to know how they actually repaired that on the fly, but we have to settle for a captain's log telling us that repairs are done.
Lwaxana is late to her wedding,
but when she finally shows up, she's following Betazoid custom by being naked, which naturally causes Campio and the Protocol Master to flee.
She goes to another mud bath with Alexander, where she thanks him for helping her make the right decision.
And it turns out that Troy and Worf are in there with them. How humorous. I can see you agree by your laughing. Cost of living. Overall?
This was a classic A and B plots that don't go together episode. The B plot never felt like anything but by the numbers filler, and the A plot was a character story that focused entirely on a relationship between characters that are not part of the main cast. That's not a bad thing in itself. I actually think that's an interesting thing for them to try, but in this case it doesn't really feel like it'll have much of an impact going forward. Worf and Alexander's relationship is at the same point at the end of the episode as it was at the beginning, and Troy is mostly just there to react to everyone else. The story itself wasn't especially interesting, and for being a Lwaxana episode, it wasn't that funny either. The stuff on the holodeck with all the dumb characters went on way too long, and definitely did not achieve the tone they were going for. This wasn't one of the worst episodes, but I thought there was very little here that actually worked. I gave it a D+.
I gave it a D-. I would argue there were 3 plots going on here. The Worf-Alexander stuff, the wedding stuff, and the Ghostbuster stuff. And this was the first time that 3 different things all happened together, and it made this whole episode seem very long, and not in a good way. The organism stuff was more normal for this show, but pairing it with the other stuff did not make any sense. The ship is literally melting away, and the computer, ventilation, life support, and warp core are collapsing. But hey, we can't forget about this goofy wedding. And I noticed that they never showed anybody from the Lwaxana side of things during the Ghostbuster stuff outside of that tiny clip in the holodeck. They never even addressed it. I would think the dude who was so hell-bent on protocol would say, wow, we almost all died, and that isn't really following protocol. Trying to shove in extra drama by having everybody collapse except Data was dumb, and it again shows that he can pretty much run this ship by himself. He doesn't need all these ugly bags of mostly water. I did think the bonding of Lwaxana and Alexander was handled well, and it was a good pairing considering both of their situations, but again, this was not the episode to do that. And as a last note, seeing Tony J show up was awesome. He's awesome.
trying to think of a quote from Spider-Man.
Spider-Man, you
Yeah, how could I forget that one?